Imagine this: you wake up one day, and the world as you know it is completely different. The sky is a different color, the trees are upside down, and the maps you used to navigate are nothing more than a collection of strange lines and shapes. Sounds crazy, right? But believe it or not, this is exactly what happened to people in the past when they tried to understand the world around them. For centuries, humans made some pretty wild guesses about the Earth, and those guesses led to some of the most incredible adventures in history. Today, we're going to dive into the story of how people's wrong ideas about the Earth and its shape led to some of the most famous explorations ever. Long, long ago, in a time we call ancient, the great thinkers of Alexandria, a city in Egypt, believed that the Earth was the center of the universe and that it didn't move. They were wrong, but they were so confident in their ideas that they wrote them down and taught them to others. One of the most famous of these thinkers was a man named Ptolemy. He wrote a book called Geography that said Asia stretched much farther to the east than it actually does. This mistake had a big impact, especially on a man named Christopher Columbus. Columbus was a sailor who lived many years after Ptolemy. He read Ptolemy's book and thought, if Asia is so far to the east, maybe I can reach it by sailing west instead. This idea was a bit crazy, but it wasn't completely new. A French cardinal named Pierre Dailly had written a book called Imago Mundi that suggested it was possible to reach India by sailing west. Columbus loved this book and kept it by his bed, writing notes in the margins. So one day, Columbus convinced the King and Queen of Spain to let him try to find a new route to Asia. He set sail with 3 ships and a crew of brave, or perhaps foolhardy sailors. They sailed for weeks, and the crew started to get worried. What if the Earth was flat and they fell off the edge? What if they found a sea monster, but Columbus was determined and they kept going? Eventually, they reached land, but it wasn't Asia. It was a new world, which we now call the Americas. While Columbus was exploring, other thinkers were also trying to understand the world. During a time called the Middle Ages, which lasted for about 1,000 years, many of the old ideas from Greece and Egypt were forgotten. But Muslim scholars in the Middle East kept these ideas alive. They studied the works of ancient thinkers and added their own knowledge. Later, during a time called the Renaissance, European scholars rediscovered these ideas and started to question what they thought they knew. One of these scholars was Pope Pius II. He wrote a book called Historia Rerum Ubique Gestarum that talked about the world. He believed that Africa could be sailed around, and he thought there was an equator, even though he couldn't see it. This was a big deal because most people still thought the Earth was flat, and that there were sea monsters and other dangers in the unknown parts of the world. But the idea of a round Earth wasn't new. The ancient Greeks, like Aristotle, had figured it out long before. They even divided the Earth into different climate zones. However, many people, especially those who took the Bible very literally, didn't believe this. They thought the Earth was flat, because that's what the Bible seemed to say. In the Middle Ages, most people's knowledge of the world came from stories and myths. They believed in all sorts of fantastical things, like giants, griffins, and islands where people had one giant foot to shade themselves from the sun. Some of these stories came from ancient texts, like Homer's Odyssey, while others were made up by travelers who wanted to sound exciting. One of the most famous books of this time was The Travels of Sir John Mandeville. It was written in the 14th century and claimed to be a true account of a knight's travels. It described lands with magical creatures and strange people, but it was all made up. Yet many people believed it was real, and it became very popular. The unknown parts of the world, especially Asia, were a source of fascination. People believed that Asia was filled with unimaginable wealth and magical places. Some even thought that the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve lived, was somewhere in Asia. When news of the Mongol Empire reached Europe, some people thought Genghis Khan was a great Christian king trying to convert non-believers. Of course, this wasn't true, but it shows how little people knew about the world. All these myths and misconceptions made it very hard for explorers to navigate. Maps from this time were full of mistakes and made-up places. For example, many maps showed Africa as being next to India, and the Indian Ocean was often drawn much smaller than it really is. Some maps even included places like the Island of the Seven Cities, which was said to have been founded by bishops fleeing from Spain, and sent Brendan's Isle, which was supposed to be an enchanted land in the Atlantic. Despite all these challenges, brave explorers like Vasco da Gama, Ferdinand Magellan, and others set out to find the truth. They faced incredible dangers, from storms and diseases to mutinies and conflicts with local people, but their journeys changed the world. They discovered new lands, met new people, and brought back valuable goods like spices, gold, and silver. As more and more explorers returned with accurate information, the old myths began to fade. Maps started to show the world more accurately, and people began to accept that the Earth was round. This led to a new era of exploration and discovery, where people could travel to far-off lands with a better understanding of what they might find. In the end, the wrong ideas about the Earth and its shape led to some of the most exciting and important discoveries in history. It just goes to show that sometimes, being wrong can lead to amazing things. So, the next time you think you know everything about the world, remember that there might still be some surprises waiting for you out there.